I was destroyed personally and professionally and had a lot of soul searching that said, let's just keep doing what we do, but we got to do it bigger. You either drop out or you go big. And I decided to keep going.
Hey, Erum, how you doing?
A little tired. I've been running around a lot. It just seems like I felt like I was on some kind of like rom-com or something, because last week it was my brother's wedding, which was like a small wedding. So if anyone's listening, that's part of our bigger friends group and they're like, oh, you weren't invited. It wasn't a big thing. So we had like the night before wedding ceremony, which is called a mehendi in our culture, on Thursday night. And then we had his wedding. It was like a day wedding. So that was Friday morning. That was in Philadelphia. So it was just my son and I. My husband was in Chicago for work, but coincidentally, we had another close friend's wedding in Chicago. So Friday after my brother's wedding, I hopped on a plane and went to another wedding ceremony.
Insane.
On the same day, 2 weddings on the same day, 2 different cities with my toddler. And it wasn't the actual wedding ceremony. It was, again, the night before. It was called a Sangeet in our friends' culture. Saturday was their whole wedding. And then Sunday, we spent some time in Chicago, since I'm like, I don't want to hop on a plane. We just have one full day of no weddings, although they had like a brunch thing, but it was really casual. I was like, let's just have some family time, just my husband, son, and I. Go to the Children's Museum, walk around Millennium Park. We didn't try deep dish pizza because I tried deep dish pizza before and it's just too heavy. I went to the Giordano's and Illuminati's before, and we've just been eating food nonstop at all these weddings, where I was like, all right, let's just do something very light. And yeah, it was great. It was a great time. It was good for like my husband and I too, because we were just busy. I've been traveling, he's been traveling, and we caught up on some things about what's going on in work, things that we've been thinking about. We talked a little bit about biotech. He's like, well, what's going on there? So we'll definitely talk about that a little bit later in this intro about our conversation, because it was really cool. But you also been traveling. We've been going nonstop. You have been, I have been.
I don't want people to think that, okay, we do this podcast. We're traveling a lot. I mean, this is unusual for us, though it feels like it has been a lot in the last 3 weeks or the last 4 weeks. But we do have clients that we take care of and are on the phone all the time with them. And it's just the lifestyle. You went to Switzerland. I went to Paris in the Alps. And now you went to a wedding. I don't have any other travel planned. I did go up to the Adirondacks because we had to close our cabin up. Our cabin is 4-season. Many of the ones in our camp are not. So regardless, they turn off the water. And that means anything that could freeze in our cabin has to be removed, which is what I did. And then as I record this, that's what I'm going to be doing. And then I'll be back in the city and I have no travel plans. I don't want to travel until Thanksgiving, which is actually in 4 weeks. So I'm happy to be in one place. We at Messaging Live usually do a quarterly review offsite. We're doing it late this year because we have been so busy. So we're going to be doing that this week. But the podcast continues, the business continues, and the travel continues. I don't know. Do you want to say anything else about that, Erum, before we do some shout outs for our friends?
No, let's give the shout outs.
All right. So the first shout out goes to Jasmina of Archaea, because Jasmina and her team launched a company that has a perfume. Company's called Future Society, and they have several scents that are based on extinct flowers or extinct plants. If you're on Instagram or if you're paying attention online, you may have come across these. So kudos to Jasmina and her team for launching this product. The other shout out goes to our friends Christina Agapakis and Natse Audrey Chiesa, who have launched a lifestyle brand, the world's first ever biodesign lifestyle brand. It's called Normal Phenomena Alive, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's very interesting. We got a preview of this earlier in the year and haven't shouted them out. Our hope is to get Natse on here soon so she can talk about the brand and what they're doing. And then finally, our shout out is to our friends who are at iGEM and the iGEM Design League. Our friend Daniel Dominguez invited us to come down to Mexico City in December for the iGEM Design League meeting. I don't know if either of us are going to go to that. You're going to India in December, so I don't know if you're going to take a side trip to Mexico. I'm not planning on it at this point, but you never know. Things happen.
Yeah, and then they have the Jamboree in Paris, right?
Right. So iGEM, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition. It's a competition that brings together students from high schools and colleges, also non-students who might be interested in competing. They compete against each other in different categories where they're genetically engineering machines to do things. They're basically creating new microorganisms that have very specific functionality modalities. iGEM's been probably going on for 20 years. It's probably coming up on its 25th anniversary. It was started by Drew Endy. It used to have the Grand Jamboree in Boston. I've been a mentor to iGEM teams. Also, Alejandro, my oldest son, was on an iGEM team that was out of GenSpace in Brooklyn. And I've also done a number of seminars to people on the iGEM design team about communications and marketing and how do you tell your story, which is what we do at Messaging Lab. So it was nice for Danielle to invite us down to Mexico. I'm really looking forward to it. Danielle apparently gives a mean taco tour that is catered to whether you are a non-Mexican or whether you are a foreigner, because as you may know, the bacteria in Mexico are different and people who are not used to those bacteria often get very sick going to Mexico. So that's biology in action. So we wish all the iGEM teams a lot of luck, those that are going to the Jamboree and all the people that are going to participate in the Design League. I mean, we're going to have to talk to Danielle to see how things go.
Yeah, I'm excited to speak with him too. I would love to go to either Paris or Mexico, but just the time's too tight. And yes, we need to stay put and keep Messaging Lab's lights on. I'm just kidding. We're doing great at our company. But one of the things that I think is very interesting with iGEM, because they have such a large community of students and non-students, people that are very enthusiastic about using biology in new ways to create new functionality. There's been a lot of companies that have spun out of iGEM, right?
Yeah, I think probably we could say that the biggest, most well-known iGEM company is Ginkgo Bioworks. They were participants early on. That was in the early mid-2000s. And I'm sure there's a long list of companies that have spun out of it. I can't think of it. Our friends at Kia Labs, they spun out of the Biodesign Challenge. These things are very important. I know that Drew Endy has said that maybe we have 20,000, 40,000 alumni of the iGEM competition. And we really need like 100x that so that more people understand what is happening, what is possible with biotechnology and biology. You and your husband, Imran, had been talking about this. I think sometimes the terminology is hard. I've been in meetings where people go, well, what is biotech?
Yeah, we brought up during our walk through Millennium Park in Chicago. My husband, Imran, is an ad man. I mean, he's been in marketing for years on the marketing tech side. He worked at Nielsen, then he worked at later stage marketing tech firms, and now he works at an advertising agency in Manhattan. So, he's like Mad Men. He's like Don Draper, although without all the drama. So he was like, okay, well, how do you guys describe biotech? And I'm like, well, the simplest thing is you leverage biology as a tool to create something useful. And he's like, okay. He's like, well, what's biology? And when we were talking about it, he came up with the term, oh, well, can you call it organic tech? I'm like, interesting. Because here at Grow Everything, we're trying to really help more people understand what's going on in the biotechnology world, in the bioeconomy, what these companies are doing. Sometimes we use certain terms. If we use synthetic biology, it might just take people's perception in one direction when we mean something completely different. And that is why we do define a lot of terminology in this podcast so we can all be on the same page. But obviously, this isn't a course, right? This is a podcast. We're not necessarily testing people on their knowledge of certain terms. So being able to use different words, I think is very important for science communications. And the one example I wanted to point out was one of our new friends, Ella King, that we met at the GenSpace party. When she found out that we do science communications and narrative design and branding, she said, you should check out Perfect Day because they have really great science communications. And Perfect Day, they use precision fermentation to create non-dairy animal-free proteins. And the way that they describe the technology is flawless. I feel like when I read their about page, they don't necessarily use a word bacteria or E. coli. They use the term microflora, which is a beautiful term, I think, when we're talking about bacteria being used to make food. Because I feel like if I put my non-biotech hat on, microflora sounds like micro plants.
Sounds like small flowers.
Small flowers, right. And I'm like, I want to eat small flowers. That's delicious. The Perfect Day has done a great job of science communications. It's a beautiful website. I encourage people to check it out. We'll put it in the show notes. Here at the Grow Everything podcast and through our work at Messaging Lab, we are trying to really define terms that are, I like to say, user-friendly, borrow a term from the technology world, but that can really hit the point home for people that aren't very knowledgeable in the ins and outs of biotech.
You mentioned Perfect Day, and I haven't looked at their website in a while, so I want to go look at that. And I was going to mention Seed Probiotics because they do a really good job when we talk about communications. They're a direct-to-consumer probiotic company, and probiotics are things you would take to maintain your gut microbiome and keep it in balance. It can get out of balance depending on what you're eating, and it also weakens as you get older. So probiotics are something that people are suggesting that as you get older, you might want to take to help with digestion and to make sure you're getting the nutrition that you're supposed to get. But this talk about communications is always super interesting to me because whenever you talk to anybody or when we give a training, one of the things we say is, who are you talking to? Who's your audience? The way that you describe your company to an investor is going to be very different than the way you describe it to your mom or your grandmother. You want to always be understood. It's very important to understand who you're talking to. In fact, I think I've got a post on LinkedIn tomorrow that's talking about know your audience. But anyway, I think it's really, really important. And we always are looking for clarity when it comes to science communications. And especially, like you said, here at Grow Everything, we're really trying to broaden the audience for biotech and what's possible with it. So I think it's on us to always make sure that we are being understood and that our guests are being understood.
Yep. And then someone who's no stranger to science communications, who's been at it for quite some time, Kevin Folta is who we'll be interviewing today. Karl, how did you meet Kevin?
So I've followed Kevin for a long time. Kevin's a professor at the University of Florida. Kevin is in the Department of Horticultural Sciences at the University of Florida. He also hosts a podcast, which is Talking Biotech. And Kevin is no stranger to controversy. I think part of the reason why we were interested in talking to him is because of the controversy. Kevin, if I remember correctly, had gone up against somewhat of an influencer in the food space and was pointing out things that they were getting incorrect. These are influencers who say things like, I don't eat anything with DNA, which means you're basically not going to eat any plants. And there is a lot of misinformation out there with influencers, so you have to pay attention to who you're listening to. Kevin found himself at the center of a controversy, being accused of taking money from Monsanto, even though it was a grant that went to the University of Florida, didn't go directly to him. I thought it would be interesting to have Kevin on to talk about science communications. So with that, let's let Kevin take it away. Dr. Kevin Folta, welcome. We're so thrilled to have you on the Grow Everything podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's a wonderful invitation.
Yeah, we would love to get into some controversy. But before we do that, which we're going to jump into real quick because it makes this interesting, why don't you let our listeners know who you are and what you do?
My name is Kevin Folta. I've been a professor at the University of Florida for 21 years. But beyond that, I've also farmed small acreage farming with my wife. She does fruits and vegetables, things like that. So I do those two main hats. And my research program has always worked on how light interacts with biology, but also the genomics of flavors and aromas. We do a lot of other neat, innovative science too. But one big part of my program has been how we communicate science with the public.
Well, we're excited about that since we are in the business of communicating science with the public, with emerging and also large companies. But first of all, you have a podcast that has been running for a long time, Talking Biotech. Why don't we talk about what inspired you to start that particular podcast? And then we'll talk about some controversy.
As long as I have been a scientist, people have encouraged me to get in front of media. And whether it was the news station once, somebody from the university, or whatever, they always plug me in because I have a background in communications and a background in speech and debate and argument, that kind of stuff. So good at thinking on my feet. So people always said, you should be doing this new podcast medium when it came out in the 2000s and just never did it. I didn't want a spotlight. I didn't want all of the volunteer work I do, editing papers and reviewing papers and service work for the university. I turned down a lot of that because it's endless. And I didn't want anyone saying, well, you got time to do the stupid podcast. So I did a podcast for a while under a pseudonym, and that caused controversy. So I finally was invited to be on with Joe Rogan in 2014 or so and talk about science, biotech. And he said, dude, you got to do a podcast. So right after that, I started Talking Biotech. It's gone every week, going on 9 years.
That's amazing.
You're an OG.
Yeah, we've got 8 years to catch up to you, but by then you'll be 17 years old.
But you've also, by going as long as you have, you've outlived most podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think most people don't realize how much work goes into it. I mean, before we started recording, we talked about how we've got everything scheduled to the minute, but there is a lot of things that go on in the background that people don't realize when it comes to scheduling, reaching out to people, coordinating schedules, getting questions done. It is a lot of work, but it is a labor of love. So, Kevin, back in 2015, let's go back in time a little bit. You were the subject of a scathing New York Times controversy that affected you and other science communicators. What happened and how did you bounce back from that? Was that before or after you started the podcast? And I just crammed a bunch of questions in.
No. That's all right. It was right when I started the podcast, and that was maybe the cherry on the sundae. But for years before, I had been blogging and serving in other areas where I was teaching science communication, mostly around biotech topics. And I would have opportunities to train scientists, farmers, industry folks on the correct way to communicate our science, that it's not just filling a gap with knowledge and an avalanche of data, that there's an appeal to values. There's all the things we talk about in science communication now that we were doing back in the early 2010s. This was really important during the labeling controversies and California Proposition 37. And I got on the radar of a lot of folks who didn't like that we were making progress. And they used the Freedom of Information Act to obtain all my emails, basically found a whole lot of nothing, but were able to cut and paste and pull quotes and make stories out of things that weren't necessarily a cogent story, make things that like a donation to my university look like I was getting paid for doing this. They wrote a story, handed it to the New York Times reporter who called me and talked to me. He took words out of my quotations to flip their meaning. His editors didn't want him to do a hit piece, but they did it. And it was September 6, 2015, and basically my career was over. I was sure that I was done because the bad stuff that came after that through social media, the fact I got a phone call from the FBI when I was traveling to give a talk saying that there was legitimate threats. My family was threatened, my laboratory, people broke into my office. I mean, just the amount of hate and anger that came from it was overwhelming. All you can really do at that point is say, what do you want to be in 5 years? Or what do you want to do after this? I mean, are you just going to quit? And I sat on an airplane one day going to Montreal right after this. They had some mechanical problems. They said the plane might take off late. And I remember saying, if this plane crashes, that's fine. I was destroyed personally and professionally and had a lot of soul searching that said, let's just keep doing what we do, but we got to do it bigger. You either drop out or you go big. And I decided to keep going, keep doing the podcast, keep writing, teaching more, better classes. And that's the only way you survive it. That's an anchor I'll drag the rest of my life. All that stuff's online. It's never going away. You know, I'd encourage your listeners and viewers, Google my name and look at what comes up under images. I mean, it's unbelievable what has happened.
I don't want you to relive this experience, but like, what was it specifically that caused this witch hunt? I mean, what was it that they were saying that you were claiming that they were angry?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. The main ones were there was a donation that was given to my university for $25,000 to allow me to put out donuts and coffee at these sessions, to stay an extra night in a hotel, to fly to these training sessions I was doing at universities. $25,000 from the Monsanto company. They saw this as a red flag. You know, there he is being paid by a company to lie about science as the narrative went. And really, it was a donation to my university that was never even used because after the threats came in, the university tried giving it back. They shifted it to a food program here on campus. There was a lot of funders for that program, private citizens, small dollars here and there. That was how it was funded. And it was great. It took the wind out of the sails of that program for a long time. But then the other allegations were that I was harassing a teenager in Canada, that I was, you know, all the stuff about, oh, he's drunk driving, all the things that you can put on somebody that had no basis in evidence or facts, but stuff that when it's said on the internet might as well be true, right? In terms of your reputation and long-term survival.
Okay. So they basically put the GMO target on your back as you are the face of GMOs that are mutating people's bodies or something.
Yeah, it just check on GM Watch. They have like 50 pages on me. Organic Consumers Association, which doesn't have anything to do with organic farming. They're an anti-biotech organization. They've got pages and pages on me. Mercola, all the usual suspects. The same folks who are anti-vax deniers, all that stuff. They really don't like me, and that's okay. I think the nice part is that they backed off in the last few years because they realize I'm a bad target.
Right.
I sell at farmers markets on Saturday. I'm not the guy you want to go after.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like people who attack or make these kinds of claims, they don't seem to understand, or they don't want to understand the benefits of GMOs, which we can get into. And it doesn't surprise me that the anti-GMO folks go hand in hand with the anti-vaxxers. The evidence continues to be overwhelmingly positive on both counts, but the controversy exists. And we live it too with our clients when we talk to them about certain products and labels and how they might show up, and to be prepared for these kinds of things, because you just never know when the target is going to appear on your back. I've been fully expecting a big backlash against biotech, given how quickly it's growing. We have these I love GMO stickers. I've got them on my laptop. No one ever says anything about them. I feel like it's subliminal positive messaging, but I'm sure if I was in the wrong place, someone would immediately take me to task for being a lover of genetic modification.
Yeah, well, I always talk about it as genetic engineering, and I don't wear it on my sleeve. I don't have the sticker on my computer.
Right.
For me, it's just another way that we solve important problems, and it's another tool in our toolbox. And I think keeping that kind of reserved approach in the position I'm in, being under the microscope, has really helped because, it keeps it real and keeps it focused. But I do agree. I think that folks suffer from disaster fatigue, that what they've been told for 30 years, you're all going to die from this, and really nothing happens. I think people realize that maybe they've been fooled.
Yeah. And I think it's great because you've been taking a different approach to resolve this. A lot of that has to do with educating people that don't understand what's happening in biotech. So you've created some really innovative courses for non-science students about the importance of communicating science. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I'm a researcher full time, and I need to teach a class like I need a hole in the head. And I absolutely love teaching, but I designed a class that was aimed at the students who would be most likely victims of misinformation. And the beauty part of this is we talk about how we're fooled, how we make cognitive errors, logical fallacies, how we have bad arguments. It's a lot about philosophy. We talk about innovation and how people stand against innovation and why they do, because it conflicts with their perceived values and identity. And then we talk about biotech and how the good things we're doing in medicine and agriculture do, from nuts and bolts all the way up through the most modern applications. And then the last part, we talk about communicating in social media and how to push back against bad information in very high road and gentle ways that win us more favor among those who are on the fence. So it's a really cool course that I just love.
And I'm curious because we kind of jumped right into it, but how did you get interested in science communication? What was the catalyst for you?
Yeah, I think I've always done it. And that's what's so funny. Even when I was in high school and studying biology, I would love to talk about what biology was and how you grew gardens and how you participated in science. When I was in college, I was very fortunate. I was at Northern Illinois University, where they have an outstanding forensics team, where I learned how to do proper persuasion and oratory and informative speaking, extemporaneous speaking, and really, really did well with this. I was a national finalist my senior year. Learning the very strong theoretical communication side and having a strong science background, I could say for sure the reason I'm a successful scientist, got grants, write papers the way I do, is because of that communications training. Those skills, I think, have been more valuable than the egghead textbooks.
Yeah, those are very valuable. We talk about that all the time. I mean, that's our bread and butter here for specific biotech companies that we work with, is communication is everything, especially when you're trying to raise money, trying to at least get the attention of potential customers. What are you saying? How are you painting the picture? And how do you do it in a way that's truthful, but also exciting? We love the Talking Biotech podcast, but we wanted to know from your perspective, what were some of the most interesting and impactful topics that you've covered? I mean, it's such a broad swath. And I know you've been doing this for so long, but when you get asked this question, does anything pop to your mind?
There's so many things in the series. The archive is 417 episodes this week. But, some of my favorite things that we talked about were, I had an interview with a 95-year-old plant breeder who was one of the first women plant breeders in the United States. And she talked about how she got the job. This is Dr. Maxine Thompson. She got the job at Oregon State University because she was outstanding cytologist in the laboratory, and her advisor died and they needed somebody to plug in. She could not be considered for a job as a woman, yet she revolutionized the hazelnut breeding program and other programs there. That's really cool. On the other side, which is more biotech, I love the new applications that are going on at places like Poseida Therapeutics and others, where they're teaming mRNA technologies with nanoparticle delivery that is targeted to specific tissues. So the fact that you can repair cardiac tissues that's scarred, you can repair liver tissue that's scarred, apparently going forward, prostate cancer, targeting the prostate gland specifically. Those are really cool stories. Maybe the other one I really liked was what's going on in prenatal diagnostics and also genetic counseling. standpoint and how biotech is contributing to more effective genetic counseling and also in crime fighting. Really cool stuff in forensics. So just biotech applications look like they're going to be huge going forward. I tell my students the job you'll take in this field hasn't been invented yet, and get excited about it because lots of great opportunities.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So first of all, Erum's background is forensics, and she was inspired by Scully of X-Files. She was studied biochemistry and worked in the lab, but that was her interest.
I have a degree in forensic chemistry and toxicology.
Okay.
So that was the goal. But going down that route, joining the FBI was a lot more rigorous and not as lucrative as joining the world of pharmaceuticals. I was living in the outskirts of Philadelphia in pharma country. They definitely pitched me in a way where I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take that money.
When I was a kid, I was inspired by the TV show Emergency. That was Agent 51. I really got into the idea of being the first one on the scene and running into the burning building. And this is kind of what I do today in this area. I like to be the one who takes on the biggest challenge with respect to communications issues. And I get invited by anti-GMO groups to be the scientist on the panel. That's because I can be there with respect. I can understand their point of view, treat them with empathy. And the best part is, after people are yelling and screaming at me and calling me an agent of Monsanto, I'll go across the street and get beer with 8 or 9 of them afterwards and convert them to understanding the science. So these are the opportunities I just love.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. I remember when this would be in the mid 2010s, I think the FDA had shut down 23andMe, and I was at New York City Biotech Healthcare Accelerator, and there was a big debate going on. And there was a guy who was a libertarian, and he's like, I just don't understand why any of this stuff gets regulated. His point of view was regulation bad and more genetic technology good. I took the point of view of what the problem with like a 23andMe is they're selling a consumer product in a way that, at least at that point, most people don't understand what they're getting into. I was just saying to Erum before we started, we were talking about this trend for people getting MRIs. A lot of people go, and it used to be, I don't know if this is the case with 23andMe anymore, if you had some potentially dangerous genetic defect or you carried genes, like I know for me, I've got 2 Alzheimer's genes, I had to sign an extra disclaimer to get that information. But most people don't understand the statistics that are involved when it comes to genetic testing. And so for me, I was like, I'm less concerned about that than I am some of the cardiovascular things, because I know I can treat them and be proactive about them. But again, it comes back to this idea of education that most people just don't have the knowledge when it comes to interpreting the results that they're being given by these big corporations that don't necessarily take that extra step. Do you think that there is a trend for companies to be more proactive when it comes to explaining what's on a label, especially if it's genetically modified or produced through using bacteria or yeast?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think you're seeing more and more trend towards it. And that was really what I was pushing for after Proposition 37 failed. I was talking to lots of food production companies and saying, can we please just voluntarily do something that says made with genetically engineered soybean oil or whatever it is? Have full disclosure, have full transparency that's scientific, so that you don't end up with a government mandated skull and crossbones that's promoted by the activist groups. And we ended up with this kind of watered down bioengineering label that nobody really knows what it means, but it was set to placate that issue and avoid a patchwork of regulatory state-driven initiatives that would have made it very difficult for manufacturers to navigate.
We had Nathan Pumplin of Norfolk Healthy Foods. They've got a genetically modified purple tomato currently on the market. Nathan said people look at the organic label as premium. They're willing to pay a premium for organic products. They're even willing to pay a lot more for those organic products. They see bioengineered, they see it as a warning. I think it's up to us in the industry to start to change those perceptions, because we will start to see products that contain very complicated biotechnology in them that will confuse the consumer unless the companies get in front of it and start to educate people in terms of what that means.
Yeah. And I found it very interesting that you go to these anti-GMO workshops or meetings. When was the last time you went, and what are their specific concerns? What are they afraid of, and how do you address that?
most recent one has not been recent at all. It's been a few years, but it was the showing of a documentary that they were assembling a panel to comment on afterwards. I was one on the panel along with a crystal healer and an organic farmer and a Reiki energy manipulator and the guy from March Against Monsanto. So this was back when Monsanto was a thing. They did all the talking points, and I would always push back gently, but boy, some of the audience just didn't like that.
Well,
They
there
didn't
are
like you
talking
pushing
points.
back. Yeah.
Well, didn't like me being gently saying that, well, the use of BT in corn and cotton has enabled farmers to cut the use of broad spectrum insecticides. And they would scream, no, that's a lie. But no, that's totally true. Let's look at citations. Pull up your smartphone. I have citations memorized. I read the literature and people can check it in real time. What was so cool was that being able to actually give people a popcorn trail to at least crack the door open to the fact that maybe they had been deceived by bad information.
I'm still not clear on what are their talking points? What are they saying that GMOs can do to our body? What are they pointing to?
Oh gosh, it's the usual litany. It's cancer, it's autism, it's all of the more elusive, hard to nail down idiopathic issues that we wrestle with as a society when we talk about healthcare. And they blame it all on genetic engineering. So that's the main thing. The other talking points are all around how farmers get sued, small farmers go out of business, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Are the Reiki and energy healers able to pull up citations as well?
No, but it's a lot parallel to the anti-vaccination movement. They say, well, all the information is just being suppressed and that scientists that have data that's contrary to the consensus don't get to publish it. And I said, no, that's not true. 80% of my work is contrary to the consensus. At least it was at the time. A lot of the regular science I do comes out much more complicated than we guessed. You know what that's like when you publish it and editors and reviewers are excited to see something that is breaking the rules or expanding our models. So it's not a question of suppression at all. We would welcome interesting observations. In the lab that finds that genetic engineering, like BT or APSPS gene inserts or whatever, in genetically engineered plants cause cancer or autism, they'll have a Nobel Prize and they'll change the way we do things.
I'd love to hear your take on this because there are people out there who say, well, science is just another religion, really. They don't want to believe that the peer review process is kind of a neutral process. It's like it can be a success or it could be a failure. And the whole point of it is to double check, triple check, quadruple check what people are doing. What do you say to people who say, oh, well, science is just another religion and that peer review is trying to push the consensus?
It's actually the opposite of religion because it's built on evidence. That religion relies 100% on faith and believing something that you don't have evidence for. Science itself is dictated by the process of science. The scientific method is dictated by the assembly of evidence to test a hypothesis. That could be right or wrong, or it could support or not support that hypothesis. So it's exactly the opposite of religion. Religion is not falsifiable. The things we test for hypotheses are falsifiable. And that's the idea. Peer review, it's like going to the dentist. They basically take the problems you have and fix them, but it's painful and it's a long process sometimes. Peer review, the way I always describe it is when I send in a paper, they send it to two people who generally agree with the way I think about things and maybe people who know me. They may send it to people who disagree with the way I do things and have no idea who I am. That's fine too. And we get back this kind of nice patchwork of here are the suggestions to make this paper appropriate for the journal or reject it outright. The people who know you, who appreciate and respect your work are your hardest critics because they're the ones who want you to continue to be visible and contributing to the field in a positive way that is expanding our understanding of a given area. So the idea that peer review is some sort of rubber stamp is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. So one of the things I wanted to talk about and bring up is kind of this field of functional genomics. You've done a lot of research in this space and talked about it quite a bit. So can you share some insights on practical applications of functional genomics and maybe other industries? How might this technology benefit farmers, consumers, and everyone in the near future?
Yeah, so the grand challenge of genomics has been to take this huge amount of data that we have from genes that are expressed and genes that are present in genomes or predicted in genomes, and now ascribe some sort of function to them. And that's always been my interest is how do you connect a gene to a sequence of DNA to what it does physiologically? And we've taken a variety of approaches on that. But really in the bigger picture of agriculture, genomics has been so valuable in helping to breed more efficiently that using genomics as guidance as to which parents to cross together and which traits we can follow by discrete genomic signatures. So in other words, discrete sequences that move along with the trait, maybe are causal to the trait. These kinds of variations allow us to breed the next generation of plants and elite plants faster, which is so necessary in the face of changing climates, diseases, pests, pathogens, you name it. We can't outrun this with traditional breeding, especially in tree crops where you might get a new variety every 30, 50 years. The other thing about functional genomics that's been fun is being able to improve crops not for the traditional issues like yield and big red things you put in a basket, all the industry traits, post-harvest quality, things like that. Now we can actually start to breed effectively for flavors and aromas and consumer sensory traits, things like consumer sensory traits, but also nutrition, traits that maybe follow higher nutrient content in food. So we can shift from the industrial applications of genomics and traits that matter to farmers and industry to those that matter to the consumer, like the purple tomato. That's a really exciting application.
Yeah, so we were lucky enough to taste that purple tomato at Ginkgo Bioworks Ferment conference in April. I may not ate it without really thinking about it. I was like, these are cool. But at Symbio Beta, a few months later, Nathan and the Norfolk team had worked with a chef to make this salsa. And the salsa was just incredible. And like we were hanging out with a group of Latin American synthetic biologists, and one of them, Daniel Dominguez, who's in Mexico City and runs taco tours there, he's like, I got to tell you, this is the best salsa I've ever had. And I'm like, wait, dude. You're the taco tour guy, but I'm super curious in terms of this genetic basis of flavor. I mean, full disclosure, we work for a company that is focused on helping cultivated, I don't know how much of this I can disclose, but they are focused on improving the flavors of cultivated foods. But when it comes to the genetic basis of it, how do genes control flavor profiles, and what has your research shown in this area?
Well, flavors and aromas come from a couple different places. It's a balance of sugars versus acids versus volatiles. So the compounds, you can smell them through aroma, or when you put something in your mouth, it will volatilize and reach up to the olfactory bulb from the behind through what they call retronasal pathways to tell the brain, this is what I'm eating. All those little sensory molecules, those molecules that volatilize and give the signature of food that move within the nasal cavity. It's those volatiles that can be manipulated. They're all secondary metabolites, very rare molecules, typically, with some exceptions, but they have very strong interactions with the human sensory spectrum. I should say the animal sensory spectrum. What we can do is identify the genes that control the levels of those metabolites. And with some of them that we've looked at, it's been presence-absence questions that some are just completely missing. And that's why a strawberry may not have a peach note, or other ones which University of Florida has worked on in tomatoes, where different volatiles that lend to the sensation of sweetness without sugar. So it's my colleagues, Thomas Calhoun, Harry Klee, Linda Bartoshuk, have really framed how that works. And the beauty there is if you could have products that have less sugar but more sweetness, that really is an industry game changer.
I mean, I just wanted to comment on what you said earlier. So what you're saying is that this understanding will allow agricultural scientists to, and I hate to use the word manipulate, but it is manipulate genes in such a way that, for example, we won't get these mealy, tasteless tomatoes in our grocery stores. We will actually get tomatoes that taste much more like they were just freshly picked in your backyard.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's actually been done here. I can give a plug to the Garden Gem tomato. It's the best tomato you'll never taste in a grocery store because this was derived by taking consumers and asking them, what do you like in a tomato? And they tasted hundreds of different varieties of tomatoes. And you found from component analysis, when this compound was present, consumers loved it. And then they started to identify the old heirloom varieties that were high in these compounds, bred them against the industrial tomato that's disease resistant, and then ended up with this compromise of disease resistance and outstanding flavor. This is really the direction we're going. And it's being done here at University of Florida, and blueberries, strawberries, tomatoes, and other crops that really were bred for yield, large size, disease resistance, and post-harvest quality, where flavor was a byproduct of, well, if it's got everything else, the consumer will take it. Consumers don't buy it with their flavor, they buy it with their eyes. You buy the tomatoes, you go home, you're disappointed, you don't buy them again.
Why do you say it's the tomato you'll never taste?
Well, because it's not amenable to industrial production. It has to be picked red, which makes it very difficult to pick it and ship it. So that's the big reason why it isn't. You can buy the plants. They used to be available online somewhere, and seeds are available from the breeding program, but it's an outstanding tomato. It's a little small for industry. So industry tomatoes, they want like the Burger Kings or Taco Bell. They buy the tomatoes that are 7 slices in uniform. Garden gem is the size of a handball, and it's great on a salad, that kind of thing, but it doesn't have a place in the industrial production picture. It's a really nice new heirloom hybrid that has the qualities that people like. It isn't a commercial for garden gem. It's a commercial for here's how we can do things differently, starting with the consumer and breeding for traits the consumer wants. And I think that's alive and well now and an expanding idea.
So yeah, I was recently in Switzerland and I was in a small town called Zermatt. They just had some fruits laid out for breakfast and I just grabbed a peach. I bit into it and my brain just exploded because it was so delicious. It had such complex flavors, very floral. It was interesting because the pit was black and small, whereas the peach pits that we see looks like a walnut. The flavor of food, I bet it was just from a small orchard that's just been around for millennia. One of the things that we've been talking a lot with the company that we work with when it comes to flavor is using the genetics to express flavor. Sometimes that's been in the DNA for eons, but just haven't been able to express themselves. So how do you unlock the flavor or introduce flavor and nutrition in peaches, let's say, for example, or tomatoes that we're saying? So I would be interested to learn what are those foods that are being explored. I mean, you mentioned the tomato, but are there other fruits, other vegetables, anything? In the purple tomato, of course, we sing the praises of the purple tomato, but anything else you see coming online, anything bizarre? Or you're like, okay, this is going to take a little bit of consumer acceptance, but once it's out there, it's going to change the game?
There's nothing that I'm aware of that really is that exciting. I mean, they just had the pink pineapple, which to me kind of fell flat. I didn't get real excited about that. When you start doing things like this for novelty, it takes away from the immediacy to do this for more important reasons, for production reasons where we can use genetic engineering. In the area of genetic improvement of things like tomatoes and strawberries, it really is an ongoing process where we are identifying the genes that control specific metabolites, the presence and absence of specific metabolites that people like. So I think it's just going to be a very gradual improvement you'll see over time, but something like that with a much more directed consumer focus. And melons too are coming along.
Yeah, I mean, the biodiversity, I think, is on a lot of people's minds. I feel like as a climate solution, of course, you know this, but talking about the tens of thousands of varieties of potatoes that existed in the world, and now there's a handful of variety that's in the industrial supply chain, but people getting those heirloom potatoes, and when you go to these niche farm to table places and they have it, and you're like, this is real? I didn't realize there was this pink potato or something like that.
Yeah, we grow lots of sweet potatoes. They grow really well by us, and we look at diversity as a really important thing because different flavors and aromas, people love that stuff. And to me, though, the biggest thing, I have a friend who's a strawberry breeder who said it took me 25 years, but I increased purple pigments in strawberries by 10%. And I said, yeah, but we made them taste better, so people are willing to eat 5 of them instead of 1. So I increased it 500% with respect to their exposure and bioavailability of that compound. The thing about nutrition in fruits and vegetables is it only matters if people eat it. So focusing on post-harvest quality, making attractive fruits that taste good, that's the way you get more nutrition in people.
Right. Yeah. And I was just watching the Netflix docuseries about living to 100. The community in, I forget which community it is, but they would eat the purple potato.
Yeah.
And the purple potato was high in antioxidants and it was just really healthy for them. And like that was like the common thing in their diet and could have contributed to their longevity. So actually I ended up going to my local store. I'm like, is there a purple sweet potato? Where is this sweet potato? I need to eat this now so I can live beyond 100. And I couldn't find it. But I think that that's something we can explore a bit. Like how do you create these functional foods where it tastes delicious, it looks beautiful, and helps us live longer and healthier?
I'd be happy to send you some purple sweet potatoes. Yes.
Oh.
There's a breeder down here in Florida. We grow them out here on a farm out by a town called Spuds. Florida is the 9th largest potato producer in the nation, and most people don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You mentioned the pink pineapple. I get a newsletter from a company in Florida that specializes in exotic fruits. And I imagine that there would be a market for a company that specializes, even if they are trendy, producing and making more widely available, maybe not on a grocery store level, but on a person-to-person level, just like the way there are artisanal meat producers. I could imagine that there's an interesting market for people who want to buy purple sweet potatoes in North Dakota that are not able to get them. But I'm curious, Kevin, because you're a farmer, you focus on functional genetics and your research is in plants. When you are out talking to people and you're educating scientists, are they surprised to know that you're also a farmer and you're also very pro genetic engineering?
Not so much. And I'm really careful about calling myself a farmer. I'm more of an employee of a farmer. She's the one who does the work full time. And I'm sitting here at a desk 8 hours a day in an air conditioned office. So I feel a little hesitant to actually call myself that. Even though we have, in a small acreage, we have 18 acres of fruits and vegetables, and it's a ton of work, but I love it. But farming audiences maybe take me a little more seriously because they know that I go to bed every night with dirty fingernails. And I think that legitimizes what I do a little bit with them, that I'm not just some egghead from a university coming to tell them what they're doing wrong, which is what a lot of university scientists do. Here in Florida, we're pretty good. Our extension is really awesome, and we work in concert with farmers, and I think there's a lot of trust that way. And so when I get to speak to farm groups, I think a lot of the older guys are like, well, here's some 56-year-old guy coming here to tell me about how I need to be participating in social media. And I'm not doing it. Come kicking and screaming, when really that's where the conversations are happening. And so I really emphasize how they can engage the public in those opportunities, especially to represent farming and what they know, because they are trusted. So my whole thing is more about communication and trust than it is about soil and fertilizer.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that because it's interesting. A few years ago, we worked with a fertilizer additive company producing like a highly concentrated organic additive to fertilizers. As we kind of helped them develop a social media strategy, we suggested that they test a lot of things out. And they found that overwhelmingly doing videos on Facebook were super effective. They'd show crops, they'd compare, and I was just floored. It was like such an unexpected result. But as they started to dig into it, they're like, look, there's guys out there who are on these big combines. What are they doing while they're standing out there? They're searching YouTube. If we can market to them and they're hungry for information and they like seeing that other growers are talking to them about these issues. So I find it fascinating to think about that. And you bring the legitimacy because not only do you go to bed with your fingernails dirty, but you've got the science background and you have this communications skill set, which I would like to ask a little bit more about. Given your background in research, communications, what advice do you give to aspiring scientists and science communicators? I mean, we all want to make a positive impact, but what kind of advice do you give them?
It's get out from under the science. And it sounds horrible to say. I learned a long time ago that facts don't change people's mind. The facts are out there. They're everywhere. You can look them up. You can lead a horse to water, that whole thing. People do not care about what the evidence says because the evidence they feel and what they feel, their views, their worldview has been shaped by people they trust and people who they feel are telling them the truth. And this is so important. Look no further than politics. You fall into camps based upon who you trust is telling you the correct information, which could be wrong. So in science, it was all about when I stopped talking about, let's look at figure 5 and the error bars here and see how the significant, once I got away from that and started talking about what we really care about. We care about feeding the food insecure. We care about farmers staying in business. We care about the American consumer, North American consumer, industrialized world consumer having better quality food to stave off long-term illness and maybe live healthier. The environment. Once I started building the argument for genetic engineering or just genetic improvement around those kinds of core values, we're all on the same page. And even an angry room full of anti-GMO people are going, well, wait a minute, the guy's kind of talking my language here. We're both looking for the environment. We got two different ways of approaching that. Maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. But once you can get to that common starting place, then you can make progress. Then somewhere down the line, the facts come in. But the thing I learned most was you can never change someone's mind. All you can do is help them change their mind. And giving them that starting point and approaching it more as, I'm here to help you understand this. I'm happy to help you. Let me know if I can do it. That approach has been so effective over so many years.
That's wonderful. I think that approach of helping them change their mind and letting them change their own mind and just having a conversation and giving them that space to think a little bit differently and coming to their own conclusions is very powerful. And you've been teaching, doing public lectures, and I'm sure you have these one-on-one conversations, developing relationships with these students, whether they're in biotech or they're non-scientists. But do you have any success stories from either people changing their mind or doing something differently based on what they've learned from you?
Yeah, there's so many of them. I mean, there's so many of them. I have people who tell me all the time, I used to be against this, but now I listen to the podcast on a regular basis. There's all those kinds of things. Probably the ones that are the most impactful, and they make me a little misty thinking about them, are when I get notes from mothers who said, I only fed my baby organic this or my kids organic this. If they went to a birthday party, I was terrified they might eat the cake. The parents who changed their mind and realized it's okay for your kids to go have a piece of birthday cake and a hot dog. It's not going to kill them. There's not glyphosate all over everything. Those emails and those phone calls are probably the best. The places where students say years after the class, they write back and say, I never realized how important this class was when I was there, but now that I'm out in the world, this is the most important thing I learned at the university. That's the things that just make me happy that I do what I do.
Beautiful.
Amazing. I'm kind of curious, Kevin, we want to be mindful of time, but what do you see as the future of biotech in the next 5-10 years and future of science communications?
Yeah, biotech is going a little nuts, as you know. I have a hard time coming up with good predictions on this one, and I wish I had a crystal ball. I think that you're going to see the biggest impacts in personalized medicine. I think you will see real application of understanding genetic variants before you go to your doctor. You'll get a genome sequence that will talk about your potential predispositions in a statistically meaningful way, that you'll have your sensitivities and resistance to different drugs, your tolerance to different drugs, different potential therapeutics, different variants that may suggest a predisposition to specific types of, say, cancers or things like that. I think these will be really important. I think biotechnology will also help us manage some of our most challenging diseases. So where we will cure sickle cell disease, I think that's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. I think you'll see therapeutic centers, outpatient centers popping up like Jiffy Lubes that'll take care of the sickle cell disease. But I also think you'll see that you will manage long-term degenerative disease like neurodegenerative disease, cancers, that you'll see these being at least managed rather than cured. So you'll live with a tumor the rest of your life. You'll live with a disease the rest of your life, and your lifespan will be longer, and you'll also have a better health span, that you'll actually be functional and useful for longer, maybe living to 100 and still being able to live independently. So that's the way I see biotech shaping up. Science communication, I think, is changing too, because I think the companies in pharmacology and in seed biology, they got the message loud and clear. Unless we're talking correctly to the consumer, our products are not going to have the impact they do. I think when I watched the COVID thing unfold, I heard government officials put a foot in the mouth over and over again, and I screamed at the TV and I said, can I please help you? I don't know how many emails I fired off the NIH, said, let's do this right. I know they have people in communications there, but they always were making mistakes and breaking trust with the consumer and with the public, that who they represent. So I think science communication is getting better. I think we're learning a lot from customer service. I learned a lot from hostage negotiation, believe it or not, that we're learning the way to convince a consumer that a technology is not dangerous. The way to convince a consumer of the benefit far outweighing the risk is by earning their trust and listening to their concerns, and by building that kind of very careful rapport that now makes our technology relevant and meaningful to them. And I think that's the message we're finally starting to figure out.
Yeah, that's definitely exciting. I actually do have a question that I'm going to go off script here, because you have a platform, lots of different platforms, but specifically a podcast. You've been doing this for several years now. But if you can get any guest on your podcast right now to talk about a topic that really is something that you want to dig into, what guest would that be and what topic would that be?
Living or dead?
Oh,
I guess a dead one wouldn't have a very good conversation. No, but
unless we generated all of their previous conversations and had the AI talk on their behalf.
That's true.
But anyway.
No, that's a great question. And I never really thought about that. I know that there are some really good guests out there who I would love to talk to. I would really like to pick Anthony Fauci's brain a little bit, more about the development of the vaccines and his experience, the roadblocks that he met, either as being a government official from within the White House, within Congress. What were some of the roadblocks he had to navigate? And then how did he have to strategize to try to communicate these things cogently? I think that would be interesting. thing. You got me a little bit at a rare moment where I don't have an immediate answer off the cuff. I've had such an opportunity to speak with so many big shots and lots of folks who are relevant in science that I don't know if I got a wish list of folks that I would love to talk to. I'll think about that.
If this question was alive or dead, was there someone that's no longer living that came to your mind?
Oh, yeah. I'd talk to Norman Borlaug all day. He's the father of the Green Revolution, who should be a household name for feeding 1 billion people. He was a very humble man who, the stories that I've never met him, but I know people who have. And he is somebody who I wish more people would model themselves after, not only because of his mission, but also the way he executed it. And I think there was a kindness that is missing in society today, especially around important issues. And that I think he frames that we can take on really important issues and solve big problems by thinking of others first, by being humble and coming to a table to solve a problem, and maybe knowing that we could be wrong, listening to others and making good decisions. I think that would be a really great interview. I'd have a good time with that.
That would be amazing. Well, people have been creating these chat bots. Maybe if someone needs to take all of the Borlaug recordings and create a chat bot based on those.
Well, I may be one.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Let's not do that. We live in simulation.
Thank you, Kevin, for telling us that at the end of the interview.
I don't know the easy way to vet if you're dealing with an authentic personality in the days of AI.
Turing test has been passed.
There you go. I could be the Max Headroom of 2023. So
yeah, we appreciate this conversation and we want to have you back because we're big champions for science communications. Of course, we're focused more on the corporate side, but the lessons are the same. They're very similar. And maybe we can have a whole conversation about hostage negotiations and how science communicators need to understand hostage communications to become better communicators.
Yeah, that's a huge one. These are things I really relish because it's really right in my wheelhouse. I like thinking about how we can solve the Rubik's Cube of people.
Right. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. We hope you have a fantastic day today, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Wow, Karl, what'd you think of that interview?
I mean, Kevin is a fascinating guy. And if we're going to talk about biotech communications and crisis communications, Kevin is a good guy to talk to and to study so you can understand what he's been through and what he's doing now to kind of overcome this perception that has been created around him.
Yeah, he has been through the ringer. You could just hear it in his voice that it was a very challenging time, probably very traumatic. I mean, he was canceled. He was ultimately canceled just by people that had different information or misinformation. I don't want to say different. Wow, that sounded like alternative facts. But like they had misinformation. They just associated him with Monsanto, people that hate Monsanto. He mentioned moms against Monsanto. There's also millions against Monsanto. I followed them on Facebook for some reason because I saw a post recently, I think after we spoke to Kevin. So you know how that works. These coincidences where you talk about something and they just appear on your feed.
Right.
But yeah, it's still going strong, even though Monsanto doesn't exist anymore, right? Bayer bought them. But it's very interesting that he continued to just talk science. I mean, he couldn't spin the story anyway. Yeah, there's a bit of a spin that you can do, but he continued to get all people in the room to talk to the mothers, to talk to the farmers. GMOs continues to be a sensitive topic. We talk about genetically modified or engineered bacteria foods all the time as a profession, not necessarily as a controversial topic. I'm sure people that are against GMOs hear about our podcast. Like, we got to pay attention because we might get canceled, Karl. I mean, I'm scared after I heard Kevin's story.
Yeah, actually, we posted something about cultured meat on LinkedIn, and I finally had someone basically say that it was an abomination. First kind of troll. But
Get ready.
What's fascinating is we have done crisis communications projects. The first rule is the same rule as in emergency medicine: do no harm. You want to tell the story, you want to tell it early, you want to stay consistent. And Kevin has done all of those things. So I think it's important to know what he's been through. And I'm a big fan. Kevin writes regularly, not in addition to doing his podcast, he writes regularly for the Genetic Literacy Project, which if you're interested in learning more about the way that the controversial side of biotech gets tackled, it's a fantastic resource. They do a really good job dissecting misinformation around biotechnology. And I think we should get John Entine on here soon enough as well. John and I have served on panels in the past. Good guy to talk to about misinformation because things are going along very nicely for biotech. Maybe not so great for cultivated meat, but there's always backlash. There's always people who are ready to jump on a controversy or create a controversy where one doesn't exist. The way to fight that is to just be prepared, know that it's probably going to happen at some point, and be clear in your storytelling, which is what we really try to do.
Be clear, be empathetic, be relevant. It's so hard to change people's minds if they're just set in their beliefs, not even facts. They have faith in what they believe and you cannot move them. But if you can talk to them in ways that's relatable to them, take an example. I love using analogies. That's just really helpful to help educate people, help them think differently about certain topics. But if we can say, hey, look, biology is one tool of many to make different things beyond medications. We have materials, ingredients, all the people that we have interviewed on this podcast. We are coming up on a year. So that's also a very exciting time for us now. We did it, Karl. We did a year of this podcast. And we just hope that more people are learning. That's all. I mean, we don't want to convince anyone that genetically modified is the way to go. Sometimes you can just use selective breeding, which we have been doing for eons, right? We don't need to modify necessarily. And we have companies that are focusing on selective breeding to express traits. And knowing what the difference is, selective breeding is much different than genetically modifying an organism by going into their DNA and making an adjustment, which still isn't bad, but let's start somewhere. Let's start with the differences. I think that will help people understand why we're doing it. For people to think that there's some evil plan to harm humans by genetically modifying plants to grow faster, to survive droughts, to grow bigger consistently, that's a hard thing to say because obviously companies are not intentionally trying to do anything bad, but sometimes they might forget some things or they make a decision that causes something to go wrong. Like let's say Monsanto, for example, it seems like the biggest controversy was how they treated farmers. And that was really bad. Was it the genetically modified foods? I think that all got convoluted in the mess. That happens where there might be a specific situation that is bad, but then people have their own agendas. They spin stories and then they're like, okay, well, let's just say it's all the food is bad so that Monsanto goes down. But we hope to create more clarity, more understanding here at the Grow Everything podcast.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We are trading in a place where there is potential for a lot of controversy, and I'm happy to be here because we are here to dispel myths as much as possible and for people to see what the possibilities are. So I'm very excited for what we're doing. I mean, yeah, we are coming up on a year, which seems crazy. It feels like we just started this thing. Unless there's anything else, I'm going to say, let's call it a pod. We have the Grow Everything hotline. The number is always in our show notes. So if you want to give us a call with any recommendations on people to interview, we do get those, by the way. Or if you have any comments or ideas for us, we listen. We would love to hear from you.
If you want to be a contributor to this podcast, you're more than welcome to become a Patreon. See the show notes for a link to our Patreon page and start talking to us. Start having a voice here on the podcast. And if you do so, we will love you and you'll be a part of the team. Unless you're like some kind of crazy anti-GMO person. And even though you pay us, we will not just be anti, but we will share your thoughts, perhaps.
Yes.
And have a reflection. Yes.
So if there's nothing else, we'll see you later.
We'll see you later.